All right, what we have here is an assignment from the first semester. I thought it might be helpful to review some key terms and basic concepts about food chains and matter and energy flow through an ecosystem. So the assignment was titled Checking for Understanding, and it was a series of true and false statements. You had to determine if each statement was either true or false, and if it was false, what made it false. So I've got the answer key here for a quick review. So statement number 1, matter and energy are the same thing. This is false. Matter is made of atoms, molecules. So a good example would be protein molecules that make up your muscles. They're made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. They're protein molecules. They have mass. They take up space, right? You can feel them. That's matter. Energy moves matter. So it takes energy to move the protein fibers that make your muscles for your muscles to work. So energy moves those molecules, but energy is not made of atoms. It's not made of molecules. Another example would be glucose. Glucose is matter. It's made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So it's made of atoms. It's a molecule. It's matter. But in glucose, there is stored energy between carbon and carbon bonds. So there's energy stored in that molecule. So it can be a little tricky. Energy is not matter. There is like a relationship between them. I'll keep it straight. This is technically the same question. Energy is made of atoms. False. Matter is made of atoms. All right, number 3. There's some food chain questions in here because energy flows through food chains. Primary consumers are at the top of the food chain. Generally, no. And I was just getting at some phrasing, the way that questions may be phrased on the AP exam. They'll often say bottom of the food chain or top of the food chain. So I want to make sure we're clear on that. But generally, no. There's a picture here going from the bottom of, say, this food chain. We've got producers are at the bottom because they can capture energy, they can store it and make that available for the primary consumers. Usually there's something that eat the primary consumers, like secondary consumers, and then there may be tertiary consumers that eat those things. So producers are always at the bottom of the food chain because they can capture energy and store it, and that makes that available to the rest of the food chain that are consumers and have to eat to obtain the energy they need. So it's a phrasing they use on the AP test. Producers are at the beginning or the bottom of the food chain, and at the top, you usually have those secondary and tertiary consumers or those top carnivores. This was just a key term I wanted to make sure you knew. An autotroph is the same as a consumer. False. Auto means on your own, automatically. So autotrophs are things that generally do photosynthesis. They can capture energy and store it. A consumer is something that cannot do that. It has to consume or eat is what we usually say to get energy. It has to get energy from another living thing, another source. Omnivores are always secondary consumers, or omnivores are always carnivores. Well, that's false. By definition, an omnivore eats both plants and animals, right? So it's both a primary consumer and maybe a secondary or tertiary consumer. So in this example, if you look at the black bear, right? A little in here. If you look at the black bear, there's algae is consumed by the caddisfly, which is like a little insect. Rainbow trout eats the caddisfly, and the black bear eats the rainbow trout. So in this case, we've got a producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary or third consumer. Here the black bear is a carnivore, a top carnivore. But black bears may also eat sap from a sugar pine. So in this case, we've got a producer, the sugar pine, and if the bear eats the sugar pine, well, in this case, it's a primary consumer or an herbivore. So depending on the food chain you're following, a black bear is either a tertiary consumer or a primary consumer. It's also called an omnivore. It eats plants and animals. All right. Herbivores, like primary consumers, okay, so herbivores are primary consumers, eat plants and carnivores, like secondary and tertiary consumers, eat other animals / meats. This is kind of a strange the way it's written, but herbivores eat plants, it's just a period, carnivores eat meat. It's kind of thing like that. Herbivores are also called primary consumers. They eat plants, period. Carnivores, also called secondary and tertiary consumers, eat other animals or meat, period. Decomposers and detritivores are just fancy names for things that eat waste and dead stuff. That is true. So decomposers and detritivores, they both eat dead stuff. Biomass is the mass of the molecules that make up living things. True. So think about what molecules make up living things you learned in biology. DNA, proteins, carbohydrates, fats. Those molecules build our bodies. Right? If we took the mass of those molecules, the fats, the carbohydrates, the proteins, the DNA, that mass would be known as our biomass. Bio means living, so the mass of living things. The kinetic energy is stored by living things in carbohydrates and fat molecules. Here I'm just getting a definition. False, right? We call this stored energy, we call potential energy. So often it's even called potential chemical energy that is stored in sugars and fats or starches. Kind of a repetitive question, but biomass is measured in grams per meter squared, while the energy stored in biomass is measured in calories, and that's true. So if you remember my white square plastic square, we put that out in a field, and I pulled up all the grass, I dried it out, I put it on a scale, I would be massing like the carbohydrates in the grass. That would be its biomass, and I would mass that and measure it in grams. But if I could put it in something called a calorimeter, and I could actually determine the calories stored in the glucose that makes up that grass, I would measure it in calories, and that would be the measure of the energy. Just like matter, energy can be recycled and reused. This is false, right? So matter, like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, through the cycles, when things die and decompose and get broken down, those atoms get rebuilt. So carbon dioxide can get converted into, the carbon can end up in glucose, and then that carbon can end up back in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So carbon can be cycled, but energy can't. Remember, as energy is passed through the food chain, some of it becomes heat. We can't eat heat. It doesn't factor back into the food chain. So only matter is recycled. Energy converted to heat cannot be used by the food chain. You can't use heat to power photosynthesis, and you can't eat heat. So the heat is lost to the food chain. So we constantly need photosynthesis and the sun to power that photosynthesis to give us that high quality energy to power the food chain, support the food chain. And the last one, the amount of biomass and energy, like the energy stored, is always greater in the producer level than in the primary consumer level. And this is, remember, per meter squared. Remember my plastic square. If you lay that down in the field and I pull up all the grass, there would be more molecules storing energy by mass than there would be if I captured all the primary consumers in that meter squared. There we go. Oh, I lied, one more. Arrows in a food chain always point to the organism being eaten. This was a trick question. I should fix this one, but arrows in a food chain should always point to the organism being eaten. It's a little tricky the way I wrote it, but remember, they go this way. They show the flow of energy. So the mouse ate the plant, and the mouse is getting the energy. So the arrow should point at the mouse. The owl ate the mouse, so the arrow points at who gets the energy. The owl ate the mouse. So the arrow is actually pointing at the consumer, the thing that is getting the energy, the thing that's doing the eating. It's a little tricky the way I wrote that, but that one is false.